The moment I walked across that stage, I looked into the audience and saw 2 empty seats. They were the seats I had saved for my parents. I had imagined that moment for years. Not because I wanted a big celebration. I just wanted to look down from that stage, find my mother and father, and see them smiling at me. Instead, the seats were empty. And the reason they were empty hurt more than I could have imagined. They were not stuck in traffic. They were not sick. They had not forgotten. They were at my brother's promotion dinner. That was the day I finally understood something I had spent my entire childhood refusing to accept. My parents did not love us equally. My name is Daniel, and for most of my life, I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things. Whenever my brother Ethan achieved something, my parents acted like the entire family had won the lottery. When Ethan made the high school basketball team, my father took the day off work to watch his first game. When Ethan got his first job, my mother made dinner and invited relatives over. When Ethan bought his first car, my father spent an entire weekend helping him choose the perfect one. I never complained. I told myself that parents simply showed love differently. Then I graduated from college. I had worked for 4 years while studying. I took extra shifts. I skipped vacations. I turned down nights out with friends because I needed the money for tuition and books. There were times when I seriously considered dropping out, but every time I felt like quitting, I remembered something my mother had told me when I was younger. She said, "Finish what you start. One day, we will all be proud of you." Those words stayed with me. So when graduation day finally arrived, I called my parents. "Are you both coming?" My mother laughed softly. "Of course we are." My father said, "We wouldn't miss it." I believed them. I even reserved 2 seats. The night before graduation, I called my mother again. She sounded distracted. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Nothing," she said. "Your brother has some good news." I smiled. "What happened?" "Ethan got promoted." I congratulated him immediately. "That's great. Tell him I'm proud of him." There was a pause. Then my mother said, "He's having a dinner tomorrow night." I looked at the calendar. "Tomorrow?" "Yes. That's my graduation." "I know." Her voice suddenly became uncomfortable. I waited. She finally said, "The dinner is at 7. My graduation ceremony was at 5. I remember thinking that maybe she was trying to tell me they would attend both, so I asked, "You're still coming to my graduation first, right?" Another pause. Then she said something I will never forget. "Daniel, Ethan's promotion is a really big deal." I stared at the wall. "So is my graduation." "I know." "Then what are you saying? We may not be able to make it?" I did not respond. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "Don't make this difficult." That sentence changed something inside me. Not because she had chosen Ethan, but because she expected me to accept it without making her uncomfortable. I quietly said, "Okay." She sounded relieved. "Thank you for understanding." I hung up. I sat there for almost an hour. I kept telling myself there had to be a misunderstanding. Maybe they would surprise me. Maybe they would show up at the last second. Maybe my father would walk through those doors. Maybe my mother would call and say she was coming after all. But when the ceremony started, those 2 seats remained empty. I looked at them once. Then I looked away. My name was called. I walked across the stage. Everyone around me was clapping. My friends were cheering. People were taking pictures. But the 2 people I wanted to see were not there. And that was the moment something inside me went completely quiet. I did not cry. I did not call them. I did not send an angry message. I simply accepted the truth. If my graduation was not important enough for them to attend, then maybe I had been making their approval far more important than it deserved to be. After the ceremony, I went home alone. There were no flowers, no dinner, no congratulations from my parents. But there was one message waiting on my phone. It was from my mother. "Hope graduation went well. We are at Ethan's dinner. He is so happy tonight." I read it 3 times. Then I put my phone face down. I had no idea that within a few months, that same family would come looking for me. And when they did, they would finally understand what my silence that day really meant. The next morning, I woke up expecting to feel angry. Instead, I felt strangely calm. For the first time in years, I stopped asking myself what I could do to make my parents proud. That question had controlled so much of my life. Whenever I got a good grade, I wondered if they would be impressed. Whenever I got a new job, I wondered if my father would finally say he was proud. Whenever something went wrong, I worried about disappointing them. I had spent years chasing a reaction I rarely received, so I made a decision. I was done chasing it. I packed my things and moved forward with my life. A week after graduation, I received an offer from a small technology company in another state. The salary was not huge, but the position had something my old life did not: opportunity. I accepted. When I told my parents, my mother barely reacted. "That's nice," she said. My father asked, "How much are they paying?" I told him. He shrugged. "You could probably make more if you stayed closer to home." I smiled. "Maybe." Then Ethan walked into the room. My father immediately changed the subject. "Ethan, tell Daniel about the new office." Suddenly, the entire conversation became about my brother, his promotion, his new responsibilities, his new company car, his plans. I sat there listening, and something became painfully clear. They had not changed. I had. A few months later, I moved. I rented a tiny apartment. I worked long hours. I made mistakes. I learned. I started saving money. And slowly, something unexpected happened. I became happier. Not because life suddenly became easy. It became meaningful. I was building something that belonged to me. I also stopped explaining myself to my parents. If they called, I answered. If they asked how I was doing, I told them. But I stopped trying to impress them. That seemed to bother my mother. One evening she called me. "You seem distant lately." "I'm busy." "You used to call more." "I know." "Are you upset with us?" I could have told her everything. I could have said that I had spent years feeling like second place. I could have reminded her about graduation. Instead, I said, "I'm okay, Mom." She sighed. "I hope you know your father and I love you." "I know." She seemed satisfied, but she did not understand. Love was not the issue anymore. The issue was that I had finally learned not to depend on it. Meanwhile, Ethan's life looked perfect from the outside. His promotion came with a bigger salary. He bought an expensive apartment. My parents visited him constantly. They posted pictures together, family dinners, celebrations, weekend trips. I saw all of it online, but I never commented. I never complained. I never asked why I was not invited. I simply kept moving. Then, about 6 months after my graduation, I received an unexpected phone call. It was my father. "Daniel, we need to talk." His voice sounded serious. "About what?" "About your company." I was confused. "What about it?" "I heard you're doing well." I laughed. "I'm doing okay." "No. Your mother heard from someone that your project has been successful." "It has." There was silence. Then my father said, "We're proud of you." Those words should have made me happy. Instead, they felt strange. Not because they were bad, because they were late, very late. Still, I thanked him. Then he said something that made me pause. "We may need your help with something." I leaned back in my chair. "What kind of help?" "We'll explain when you come home." I asked him what was wrong. He said, "Nothing serious," but his voice told me otherwise. A week later, I drove home. When I walked through the front door, my mother hugged me. My father shook my hand, and Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table. He looked uncomfortable. That was when I knew this had nothing to do with a simple family conversation. My father sat down. "We have a situation." I looked at Ethan, then back at my father. "What happened?" Nobody answered immediately. Finally, my father said, "Ethan made a mistake." And that was when I realized they had not invited me home because they missed me. They needed something from me. Ethan finally spoke. I made a bad investment. I waited. He explained that after his promotion, he had started investing money with someone he trusted. The investment failed. Then he borrowed money to cover the losses. Then he borrowed more to fix the first mistake. Eventually, the debt became larger than he could handle. My father had already helped him. My mother had already used most of her savings. But there was still a large amount left. I listened without interrupting. Then my father looked at me. "We need you to help." "How?" He hesitated. "We want you to take out a loan." I almost laughed. "You want me to borrow money to pay Ethan's debt? It would only be temporary." I looked at Ethan. "What do you expect me to do?" He looked down. "I'll pay you back." I asked, "How long?" He said, "A year. Maybe 2. I shook my head. "No." My mother immediately became emotional. "Daniel, please. I'm sorry. You're his brother. I know. We are family." I looked at her. So was I on graduation day. The room went completely silent. My mother looked shocked. My father lowered his eyes. Ethan stared at the table. I continued, "I'm not bringing up graduation to punish you. I'm bringing it up because that day taught me something. When I needed you, you chose not to be there. Now you need me, and suddenly family matters." My father said, "That is not fair." I smiled sadly. "Maybe it isn't." Then I stood up. "I'm not giving Ethan money." My mother started crying. My father became angry. "You have enough." I looked at him. "How do you know?" "Because you're doing well. That doesn't mean my money belongs to everyone else." Ethan finally looked at me. "I understand." That surprised me. My father did not. "You're really going to let your brother lose everything?" I answered calmly. "No. I'm going to let my brother face the consequences of his own decisions." That was the first time I had ever said something like that to my father. I expected him to explode. Instead, he became very quiet. I left that night. But I did not stop there. The next morning, I made a different decision. I contacted a financial advisor. Not for Ethan, for myself. I wanted to understand exactly where I stood financially. I learned about investing. I learned about saving. I learned how to protect my future. And over the next year, my career grew faster than I expected. The project I had worked on became successful. My company offered me a leadership position. My salary increased. I moved into a better apartment. I built an emergency fund. I started investing carefully. And I never told my family how much I was earning. Then one evening, my mother called. "Daniel, your father wants to talk to you." I said, "Okay." My father came on the phone. His voice was different. "We made a mistake." I did not answer. He continued, "We should have been at your graduation." I looked out the window. For months, I had imagined hearing those words. Now that they were finally here, they did not hurt anymore. "I appreciate you saying that," he sighed. "Can we start over?" I thought about it. Yes. There was a pause. But starting over does not mean forgetting everything. I understand. That conversation became the beginning of something new. Not the old family. Something different. I kept my distance. But I stopped carrying the anger. Ethan eventually sold his expensive car and moved into a smaller apartment. He worked extra hours and slowly paid down his debts. He never asked me for money again. Months later, he called me. "I owe you an apology." I smiled. "For what?" "For making you feel like you were always second." I said nothing. He continued. "I used to think our parents were proud of me because I deserved more. Now I realize they were just used to putting me first." That was the first time Ethan and I ever had an honest conversation. And strangely, it brought us closer. But the biggest surprise was still coming. Because almost 2 years after my graduation, my parents invited me to dinner. They said they had something important to tell me. When I arrived, they were both waiting. My father stood up. "We want to give you something." He placed an envelope on the table. I opened it. Inside was a letter. And the first sentence made me stop breathing for a moment. The letter was from my parents. It was not about money. It was not about Ethan. It was about me. My mother had written most of it. She explained that after my graduation, they had started realizing how badly they had treated me. Not because someone had forced them to see it, because they had watched me walk away. They had expected me to come back. They thought I would eventually call. They thought I would need them, but I did not, and that silence forced them to look at themselves. My mother wrote that she had always believed she was helping Ethan. She thought he needed more attention, more support, more encouragement. She thought I was strong enough to handle being overlooked. Then she wrote something that stayed with me. She said, "We confused your strength with your lack of need." I read that sentence several times. My father had signed the letter. At the bottom, he had added his own message. I thought being your father meant providing for you. I did not realize sometimes it simply meant showing up. I folded the letter. My mother was crying. My father looked embarrassed. I finally said, "I forgive you." They both looked at me. "But I cannot go back." My father nodded. "I know. I don't want to be treated like the second son anymore." "You won't be. And I don't want Ethan to be treated like the first son either." My mother wiped her eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean you don't have to choose between us." That night, we talked for hours. For the first time, nobody compared us. Nobody praised one child while ignoring the other. Nobody asked for money. Nobody brought up old arguments. We simply talked. When I drove home, I realized something. I had spent so much time imagining revenge that I had forgotten what real victory looked like. It was not making my parents suffer. It was not humiliating Ethan. It was not proving that I was more successful. Real victory was reaching a place where their approval could no longer control my happiness. And I had already reached it. A few months later, my company promoted me again. This time, my parents came. They arrived early. My mother brought flowers. My father stood near the entrance waiting for me. When I walked into the building, I saw them. And for a second, I remembered those empty seats from graduation. But this time, I did not feel the old pain. I smiled. My father hugged me. My mother said, "We are proud of you." I answered, "Thank you." Then Ethan arrived. He was no longer living the glamorous life he once had, but he looked happier. He had paid off most of his debt. He had started over. He shook my hand and said, "You ready?" I laughed. "More than ready." We walked inside together. That moment meant more to me than anything my parents could have said 2 years earlier, because I was no longer standing alone, but I also no longer needed anyone to stand beside me. That was the difference. My parents had finally learned to show up, and I had finally learned that I did not have to beg them to. People sometimes ask what I did after my parents skipped my graduation. The answer is probably not what they expect. I did not destroy their lives. I did not expose them publicly. I did not take revenge on my brother. I did something much harder. I stopped waiting for them to change. I built my own life. I stopped measuring my worth by how much attention my parents gave Ethan. I stopped competing with my brother. I stopped trying to prove that I deserved the same love. And once I stopped chasing their approval, I finally had the freedom to become the person I wanted to be. The irony is that this was exactly what eventually changed my family. My parents saw me moving forward without them. They saw that I was not angry. I was simply independent. That forced them to understand that they had taken my presence for granted. Ethan changed too. He learned that success does not protect you from consequences. He learned that being the favorite does not mean you will always be saved. And I learned something about myself. For years, I thought revenge meant making someone feel the pain they caused you. Now I know better. Sometimes revenge is simply refusing to let someone else's choices define your future. My parents missed the biggest day of my young adult life. I could have allowed that moment to become the story of my life. Instead, I made it one chapter. Just one chapter. And that chapter ended the day I stopped asking why I was not enough. Because the truth was simple. I was always enough. I just kept asking the wrong people to prove it. Today, my relationship with my parents is not perfect. Maybe it never will be. But it is honest. And honestly, That is worth more than pretending everything was fine. I still have the letter my mother wrote. Sometimes I read it, not because I need the apology, but because it reminds me how much can change when people finally face the truth. And whenever I think about those 2 empty seats at graduation, I no longer see rejection. I see the beginning of my independence. That day, I thought my parents had taken something from me. Years later, I realized they had accidentally given me something. The courage to stop waiting. The courage to build. The courage to walk away from people who only showed up when they needed something. And most importantly, the courage to understand that your value does not become smaller just because someone fails to recognize it. So if you have ever been the child who was overlooked, the sibling who was always expected to understand, the person who showed up for everyone but wondered who would show up for you, remember this. You do not have to spend your whole life proving that you deserve a seat at someone's table. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is build your own table. Invite the people who genuinely care, and when the people who once ignored you finally realize what they lost, you do not have to celebrate their regret. You can simply keep moving forward. Because the best revenge is not watching someone fall. It is becoming so strong, so peaceful, and so independent that their decision to leave you behind no longer has the power to stop you. My parents skipped my graduation for my brother. And yes, it hurt, but what I did afterward changed my entire life. I stopped chasing them. I chose myself, and in the end, that was the one thing they never expected me to do.